Welcome to a short reflection from Bonnie Man from Scotland on this second Sunday of Easter. And for many, it's their fourth Sunday in lockdown due to the COVID-19 virus. This morning, I'm going to just read a short extract from the Gospel of John, chapter 20, and then offer a reflection for you for the rest of the week. In the evening of that same day, the first day of the week, the doors were closed in the room where the disciples were, for fear of the Jews. Jesus came and stood among them. He said to them, "Peace be with you." And he showed them his hands and his side. The disciples were filled with joy when they saw the Lord, and he said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father sent me, so am I sending you." And after saying this, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. For those whose sins you forgive, they are forgiven. For those whose sins you retain, they are retained." Thomas, called the twin, who was one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. And when the disciples said, "We have seen the Lord," he answered, "Unless I see the holes that the nails made in his hands, and can put my finger into the holes they made in his side, I refuse to believe." 8 days later, the disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. The doors were closed, but Jesus came in and stood among them. "Peace be with you," he said. Then he spoke to Thomas. "Put your finger here. Look, here are my hands. Give me your hand. Put it into my side. Doubt no longer, but believe." And Thomas replied, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "You believe because you can see me. Happy are those who have not seen and yet believe." There were many other signs that Jesus worked and the disciples saw, but they are not recorded in this book. These are recorded so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing this, you may have life through his name. The Gospel of the Lord. Today's Gospel reading reveals the compassion and mercy of God. Firstly, we see it in the reaction Jesus shows to his chosen apostles, who had deserted him just a couple of nights before. They had abandoned Jesus in his most difficult hour. But Jesus wasn't going to abandon them. As Jesus passes through the locked doors, he passes through their fears, their regret, and their guilt, and appears to them. He hasn't abandoned them, but shares his peace with them. And he reiterates his confidence in them by reaffirming their mission. "As the Father has sent me, so I send you," he says. God also reveals his compassionate and loving mercy in Jesus' reaction to those who had crucified him. Does he set out to crush them in revenge? No. Instead, he sends out his apostles to tell them and the entire world that had crucified God that they can be redeemed, that God has not condemned them. "As the Father has sent me, so I send you." And just to make sure that the church is equipped to communicate this message, Jesus gives the ultimate revelation of God's mercy. He delegates to his apostles his mercy to forgive sins. When he says to them, receive the Holy Spirit, whose sins you forgive are forgiven them, and whose sins you retain are retained. For Catholic Christians, this is the explicit institution of the sacrament of reconciliation, the sacrament in which God's mercy overwhelms the misery of our sin with his merciful forgiveness, love and peace. Of all the apostles, perhaps doubting Thomas experienced his compassionate mercy most dramatically. Thomas was enraged that Jesus had failed. He was brooding over it. He was nursing his anger and his sorrow in seclusion. So when he finally heard the news of the resurrection, he just wouldn't accept it. Unless I see the mark of the nails, I will not believe. Not long after the resurrection, Jesus is with the other apostles who are locked inside with their fears, their doubts. And Jesus comes through those locked doors once again and wishes them peace. Immediately after greeting the whole group, Jesus turns and he speaks to Thomas directly, lovingly, gently. Touch my wound, Thomas. Believe in me. He willingly obliged Thomas's stubborn request. The previous hesitation and resistance of Thomas didn't offend Jesus. Jesus was eager to restore Thomas's faith. Thomas sees this, and he sees that Jesus humbly lowers himself to Thomas's level, letting him touch him, letting him feel Jesus' real physical presence. Thomas then responds by falling on his knees. And he's the first apostle to proclaim his faith in Jesus' divinity, calling him my Lord and my God. The very titles given to God throughout the Old Testament. It's fair to say that each of us has been a doubting Thomas at some time in our lives. We've resisted God's action in our lives in one way or another, angry at him, not trusting him, rebelling against him, ignoring him. Our relationship with him may have faltered. And it's precisely in those moments of separation that Jesus wants to reveal his boundless, compassionate and loving mercy, coming down to our level and winning back our faith and restoring our loving relationship with one another. What does this boundless mercy do for our troubled lives in the here and now, in this time of the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown? I wonder what Jesus wants it to do. Certainly it would be to give us hope and peace of heart and mind and spirit. Those plagues of our lives, anxiety, frustration, stress, may often be traced back to our doubts. Perhaps doubts of our own worthiness, or doubts about the compassionate and loving mercy of God. Or maybe about his desire or his ability to forgive us, to fix our mistakes, to move us from failure to success and to bring good out of evil and life out of death. When we suffer from anxiety, frustration, stress, or suffering, if you like, the doubting Thomas syndrome. But the revelation of God's merciful love wipes away all our doubts, all our fears. If somehow we'd forgotten beforehand, we know now, without any doubt, that we are worthy, because God has made us worthy, that God has forgiven us, and God always will be willing to forgive us. God's love is limitless as his forgiveness. He has overcome the force of evil in our world. Today, God reminds us of his mercy, and with that, he says to each one of us, just as he said to his apostles 20 centuries ago, those confused, frightened, anxious and doubting apostles, he says to us, peace be with you. And Jesus again reminds us of our mission to share that peace, hope, love and compassion with everyone in our world. A world that needs a relationship with Father, Son and Holy Spirit, possibly more than ever before. Wishing you and yours a blessed second Sunday of Easter, filled with faith, hope, health, happiness and love. Stay safe. God bless you.